Today's conversation is with someone whose work I admire, not just because of his accomplishments, but because of what those accomplishments represent: longevity, clarity of purpose, and this unwavering commitment to building platforms that really matter. Dexter Wimberly is a globally recognized curator, a cultural strategist, an arts educator whose impact spans over 300 artists in over 4 continents. He's organized exhibitions in museums, galleries, and many alternative spaces. He's done that in New York, Berlin, Tokyo, Japan, and beyond. His curatorial practice includes landmark exhibitions like The Gentrification of Brooklyn, The Pink Elephant Speaks, Black Abstractionists, From Then Till Now, and The Ease of Fiction, projects that interrogate culture, identity, and the politics of visibility with this rare blend of intellectual rigor. He's a curator, yeah, but also a connector, a builder, and someone who understands the art world as both a creative space and a strategic system. He's helped artists navigate career paths. He's helped institutions reimagine how they engage within themselves and also with communities. And he's done it all while staying rooted in his values and vision. But Dexter's influence extends beyond exhibitions. As the founder of the Hayama Artist Residency in Japan, the co-founder of Art World Conference, and the former CEO of Creative Study, he has actively redefined in his own way what it means to support artists, not only in terms of opportunity, but in infrastructure and sustainability and long-term vision. He's also a senior critic at the New York Academy of Art, where he mentors the next generation of cultural thinkers with the same clarity and care that defines his curatorial practice. What makes Dexter's journey particularly resonant, especially for someone like me, is how intentional he's been in carving out a multidisciplinary career on his own terms. He moved from marketing and communications into curating, not as a pivot, but as an expansion. And in doing so, he's shown what's possible when you bring together business acumen, creative vision, and a deep respect for artists and their work. This conversation is one I'm extremely grateful to have. It's not only a look into the mind of one of the most thoughtful curators I've spoken with, it's an invitation to reflect on what it means to build a life in the arts with purpose, generosity, endurance, and freedom. Let's get into it. Dexter, how you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to be here too. I've seen, I've seen the projects that you've done, and I've been following your work for a while, and I'm really excited to engage in this conversation with you. I was just telling you a little second ago that everyone seems to know who you are and they really admire your work, and it's an honor. It's an honor to be in conversation with you today.
Well, thank you for that. And, it's always interesting to hear what other people are saying or think. I'm so busy with work on so many different projects that it's always great to just have a conversation with someone new. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And, just kind of diving into your work and studying the work that you've done, it's really been inspirational to just kind of dive into the work that you do. And I found a lot of similarities. And so, after this call, I might have to ask you for some mentorship.
Well, I'm
You've done the thing.
happy to share whatever I can.
Yeah, so thank you for making time. Before we even get into like your curatorial projects and all of the work that you've done across institutions, how are you feeling about the work that you're doing right now?
Well, that's a great question. I feel very fortunate because I wake up every day with my own mission and doing the things that I've chosen to do. And while all of those projects don't necessarily all go exactly the way I would like, I mean, because there are other people involved and a lot of other variables, I feel fortunate and fulfilled because I'm following my own path.
Hmm. Hmm. That says a lot. And I know that hasn't been I would imagine that hasn't been in an easy journey. And you've worn so many hats. You know, you're an artist advocate, you're an educator, you're an entrepreneur, and I wonder what moment first made you feel like a curator.
Um, well, I think to answer that, I have to kind of go back in time a little bit. In the mid 90s, I started in an advertising and marketing agency in New York City. I was really young, like 21 years old. And at that time, I didn't really know much about the art world. It wasn't my focus. It wasn't a space that I had done any work in. Um, and um, and the only creative people at that time that I was surrounding myself with were people that were either in the entertainment industry or maybe they were doing design work. And as time went on, I started meeting a lot more people, and some of those people were artists. And I just was having conversations with them about their life and what it meant to be an artist, um, compared to, let's say, a business executive, quote unquote.
Mm,
And and some of those conversations led to friendships.
mm,
And when you become someone's friend, then you start to ask more intimate questions and you start to understand more about their life and their challenges.
yeah.
One of the things that was recurring in some of those conversations was just how difficult it is to be an artist. Particularly, we're talking about New York City, early 2000s,
Mm,
before this sort of, I guess you could say, boom that has happened in the past 15 years, 10, 15 years around emerging art and artists. To be an emerging artist in the early 2000s without gallery representation,
mm,
the prospects of you being able to like make a living were not high, right? And this is also like pre-social media as well. So then you didn't even have that outlet as a
yeah.
way to just self-promote.
Yeah.
And so those conversations evolved into, what can I share? What can I do to impart some of my own experiences in business
Mm,
and inject that into the life of the artist that I knew?
mm,
And started thinking about, well, although I've never, owned a gallery or sold any artwork or organized any exhibitions, I do know what it means to like create an event.
mm,
And so
right.
my early forays into curating were really more along the lines of me creating events for artists. It wasn't really like, you know, a museum or a gallery. It was more like, I can get your work in front of people, right? And
Yeah.
we can just get creative about that. Maybe some magazine is having a launch party. And again, we're talking about early 2000s. Maybe some magazine's having a launch party and I can get your work on the walls at that launch event, right? So it's not the kind of thing I would do now,
Yeah.
but then you kind of get in where you can, right? You just kind of like get creative. And it was only years later, um 2006, 7, 8, when I started thinking more seriously about leaving the advertising and marketing PR world and really immersing myself in the art world, still with a lot of questions. Like I didn't know what was going to happen or how I was going to make that work, but I figured I could.
Do you still have questions?
Oh, all the time, all the time.
Mhm.
There's some questions that I think may never be answered, and I'm fine with that. Um, you know, I am a firm believer that life serves no purpose if you don't learn and improve. Then sort of like, if you're 45 or 50 years old and you've been doing something since you were 25 or 30, you should know more.
Yeah.
If you don't know more, that's peculiar. And so there are some things that I think I figured out, and then there's some things that I think I may never actually figure out. Like, I'll give
Mm,
you an example. For people who are not in the art world, there's always questions about, well, how does an artist become the next big thing? right? So to speak. And that's just, obviously the next big thing is a weird terminology because like, what does that actually mean? But just think about it from like commercially successful. There are a lot of different answers to that question. And there are a lot of different examples of artists that have become commercially successful. And by commercial, I mean selling a lot of artwork, just to be clear.
Yeah.
There are a lot of examples of artists that have become commercially successful, and there's different paths to that. And there's no one answer. And so I think I will always be figuring out those different paths, not because I'm an art dealer, because I'm not. But I do know that because I have deep relationships with artists at different stages of their careers, it's important for me to continually like sort of unpack that and try to understand that. And as technology changes and as culture and societal norms shift and ebb and flow, the answer to that question can sometimes become more and more elusive.
When you approach that, are you approaching that from a strategic sensibility? Meaning when you're talking with artists that are in specific stages within their career, how are you approaching the suggestions or the advice or the thoughts that you lend to them when they ask for that advice?
Well, it's interesting because I exist in the art world in a, in some ways in a very specific role, but then in other ways, sort of like liminal, sometimes shifting role.
Yeah.
And to explain what I mean and how that relates to your question. So, there was a time earlier in my career in the art world where I spent an awful lot of time trying to work one-on-one with artists on, let's call it career development. The reason I did that was because in those early days, and again, we're going back more than 15 years, the reason I did that is because in those early days, it was a way for me to develop relationships with artists and by extension, relationships with their networks, their galleries, collectors, people like that.
Yeah.
Because I knew from my prior business experience that your relationships and your, let's call them contacts, are critically important. Who can you send an email to and know that they're going to reply?
Right.
Who can you call and know that they're going to answer? Who can you ask for a meeting with and know that they're going to take the meeting, right? Knowing the answers to those three questions and knowing for sure who those people are, it's critically important. So for me, in my early days in the art world, I took a page from my early days in the advertising and marketing world. And that page I took out, and I'll give you an example, and I won't lose the thread here. So in the late 90s, when I was building my agency, we were getting, I have a business partner then named Barney Bishop. We were getting a lot of press because we were two young Black men in a space that there weren't a lot of people like us in.
Yeah.
Whenever we got an article written about us in a magazine, I was more interested in who else was in the magazine than me being in the magazine. And the reason for that is if I go to the, and again, you're talking about late 90s. So if I would go to a newsstand and pick up a magazine and, and through good fortune, me and my business partner are featured on page 50, then I want to see who else is in the magazine because I'm going to send them an email or ask for a meeting or call them and use that magazine as a pretext to say, hey, I was just looking at, XYZ publication. I just happen to be interviewed on page 50, but I see that you're on page 35. I'd love to grab coffee with you. They instantly know you're a real person. They instantly know something about you.
Yeah.
And because you're both in that same publication, even though they might be immensely more successful than you,
Right.
kind of creates a sense of parity, right? Like it's, oh, I can meet with this person, right? They're not going to completely waste my time, right?
Right.
So bringing that back to my early days in the art world, those artists that I was developing these relationships with, it was through those conversations that I would be able to get introduced to a gallery owner,
Mm.
or get introduced to a collector, or get introduced to someone at a museum. And because the artist making the introduction was someone they had already worked with, it instantly gave me some sort of credibility that I could just leverage, right?
Mm.
And it was always about like, you know, building on those relationships, stacking on those experiences,
Yeah.
you know, staying true to my word, acknowledging what I don't know, continually trying to learn, reading. Like that was like critically important because I didn't have an art education background. I don't have a, art history degree. All of my interests prior to the art world were in marketing and law. I was going to, pursue getting a law, degree that at one point, it was like a lot of different things that were not connected to the art world. So I knew I had a steep learning curve.
Mm.
And the only way I was going to get over that curve or climb that steep learning curve was myself.
Mm.
Like no one was going to do that for me but me.
Right.
And so those early relationships with artists and those conversations and that advice that they would ask of me, I knew there was a limit to there was so far I could go with the advice because my experiences had to be more fleshed out.
Hmm.
And so rather than trying to become sort of an artist manager, and again, like what does that even mean? Like instead of trying to do that or to be someone who was like an agent for artists or things like that, which I knew if that was a path I wanted to pursue, I could.
Right.
I knew I could build that out if I want, but that's not what I wanted to do. I was much more concerned and interested in getting people to experience art in meaningful ways.
Mm.
And being a curator was a way to do that. And I could also sort of kill two birds with one stone because that also meant that I would be giving artists opportunities as well.
Right. You
Right? Because
said
you
so
got
many things that just created a ton of questions for me. And so I'm just kind of pulling at, which one do we approach? Because you said a lot that was really, really important about how you thought strategically. And it feels strategic with what you're saying, and me understanding your background in communications and marketing, and me having that same background. I understand your approach, and that almost that public relations approach, for you being in the magazine and pulling at someone else in the magazine is really critical to building business, and it's really critical in understanding how to properly approach building new relationships within business. What I further would like to understand is, since you were working so closely with artists, when did you begin to feel comfortable with the title of saying, I am a curator?
so early in my career in the art world, I was really concerned about whether or not I had the right to call myself a curator, not having a traditional art history background and degree.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, because I didn't want to be seen as this sort of fake intellectual, this dilettante,
Mm.
just trying to like pretend to be something that I'm not.
Mm.
I had to really make a decision that I was going to take this work seriously, and not play around,
Mm.
and that this was going to be like my life work, not just like something I'm dipping my toe in.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of conversations with people who were more established, who had those sort of traditional credentials, and some of them were very supportive of this role I wanted to sort of pursue. Others were, critical, which is fine. People are entitled. I think there was a period of time, maybe 15 years ago, where there were a lot of people calling themselves curators who didn't necessarily have the commitment to that role, but it was like word, a buzzword,
Yeah.
that just found itself spilling into everything. I knew that would ebb and flow because that's just how trends are, right? I wasn't really concerned with that. But to answer your question as directly as I can, it was around 2000 and must have been 2008 or nine, and this was a rough time for me personally because I lost my mother that year. I was dealing with the same fallout of the economic crisis that everyone else was dealing with in one way or another. In 2008, business was not good.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And which gives me a certain kind of perspective on what's going now in the world. We can get to that later, I'm sure.
You're right.
Business was not good, and personal life was not good, and there was just a lot of crazy things going on. But I was still pursuing this goal of curating shows, and I did this project in Brooklyn, in Dumbo. Had a Powerhouse Books, like a big sort of almost like arena-sized bookstore in Dumbo. So it was an artist. It's not really important like who it was, but it was like an artist. I did a installation of his work at this bookstore, and there was a woman who, interestingly, I'd gone to high school with, named Lori Dumbo. Lori was at the time the executive director and founder of a cultural center slash small museum arts institution in Fort Greene, Brooklyn called Mokata, Museum of the Contemporary African Diaspora. And I invited her to this thing I'd done in Dumbo. Like I said, we went to high school together, but we weren't friends in high school. I mean, she used to joke and say that I was hanging with the cool kids. I'm not quite sure what that means because I never felt like I was hanging with the cool kids. Not really. But anyway, so she said she needed a curator for their next exhibition, which is going to be about gentrification in Brooklyn. And she asked me if I'd be interested in curating the show. And, that was a turning point for me because it was the first time an arts organization, an arts nonprofit had approached me about a project. And I felt like that gave me the confidence and the clarity that I could take on that role and moniker. Because that was an arts institution asking me to curate a show.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that changed things for me because it changed my perspective.
Right. Was that clarity, this might be a selfish question, but was that clarity instant, or did you still have to move through a few bumps and a few curves before it was actually really clear for you?
I think it was clear for me pretty quickly, but the obstacles still remained. I'm originally from Brooklyn. I'm originally from Bed-Stuy, and so Brooklyn, even now, even though I live in another country, Brooklyn still is foundational for me. Not just because I was born there and when I was born there, but because so much of my cultural and creative life is rooted in those experiences I had in Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, right? And I was also running parallel with so many other creative people who would go on to become world famous people. Like I would see people like Spike Lee all the time, who I eventually developed a business relationship with. I would see lots of actors and actresses, musicians, Mos Def. Like I went to high school with Talib Kweli. Like it was just like it was an interesting time to be in that borough. And so when I started curating proper, right? I did a lot of things in Brooklyn. Like Brooklyn was the center of it all for me. So I did that show at Mokata. There's another like small gallery nonprofit called Skylight Gallery. I did a few projects with them. I worked with the Brooklyn Historical Society on some projects. I did some things with the Brooklyn Arts Council. You see the theme here, right? Like I was just like wherever there were opportunities in my borough, I was, like running with those because I figured I could work out. It was like if I was a stand-up comedian, and it's a weird comparison.
No, I
That
get
was,
it.
but that was me working on my material,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I wasn't gonna try to contact a large museum in another city or state and propose a show before I knew what my what was the value I was actually going to be able to bring to them.
Right. You built your portfolio. You built your CV.
Yeah.
You built your proof of concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Being around such beautiful minds, um, how did that inform you? I know growing up in Brooklyn, growing up in Bed-Stuy really informed your work, as you said, but being around these people, these creatives that went on to be such huge stars, how did that inform your confidence that you were so close to, and even if you weren't close in conversation, you were close in proximity to people who went on to be and have success in the arts? How did that inform your confidence?
Um, it's funny. I talk about this less and less now as I've gotten older. Even though I guess it's all a matter of perspective. Some days I feel incredibly young. Some days I feel my age. Some days I feel old. I guess that's human, right? We all kind of go through that. But really important piece of trivia here is that I was a rapper in a rap group for many, many years before I became an adult, right? So from age 15 to like 21, just before getting into the marketing and ad world, like actually age like 14 to like 21, I was in one or two different rap groups, going to the studio, making tons of music, performing live on stage, opening up for established acts that you've heard of. I'm not going to say their names. Um, and I had no fear of being on stage, no fear of being in front of people, no fear of talking to strangers, no fear of presenting ideas cold.
Mm.
Because one thing's for sure, if you've ever performed a song in front of 1,000 people who did not come to see you, who don't care who you are, and want you to get off stage so they can see the next act as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to do that and keep their attention for 20 or 30 minutes, you can pretty much talk to anybody about anything. That's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
so
agree.
and so with that in my background as a creative person, I felt pretty like emboldened and confident that I could take my ideas and make them reality.
Mm.
My peers, whether they were close to me or by extension, go on to become successful in their different realms, whether it's entertainment or business. It's always inspiring. Um, I've never been a jealous person. I deal with that emotion the same way I guess many other people deal with it. Like sometimes you wish something great that happened to somebody else had happened to you. I mean, we're all human beings. I mean, like, whatever, that's life.
Right.
But I've always seen other people's success as more of an inspiration and as a driver than I have viewed it as some sort of, negative or downer. And I constantly recalibrate that, even to this day. Like making sure that what I'm feeling is empowering me and not doing the opposite.
Hmm.
And that's also like, I guess, important thing to share with artists, because I know whether they say it or they don't say it,
Yeah.
looking at other people become wildly successful while you're still trying to make it happen
Mm-hmm.
can be really difficult,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have the same background. Maybe you went to the same school. Maybe you're the same age. You have all these boxes that you can check. And then you might even say, and this is highly subjective, you might even say, my work is better than theirs.
Yeah.
And still, right? And they're doing all these things. So that's a hard place to be, like a hard feeling to have. So for me, as a curator and sort of arts professional, I just try to make sure that I'm on track with my goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's great to see other people who came from equally humble beginnings really make big successes.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna tell you this. The worst thing you could have done is tell me that you used to be a rapper.
I know, I know, I know. I it's like I always like think to myself like, it's so material. But here's the thing:
Yeah.
it's so material
Mm-hmm.
to who I am, even though I don't do it anymore. We'll never do it again, and because and this is me as a teenager, right? Like you have all this schoolwork you have to do, and tests and all that for school. But I was writing pages and pages of my own ideas
Mm-hmm.
nearly every day for
Mm-hmm.
years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that has impacted my way of thinking and working through ideas even to this day.
It's foundational. And I don't know many folks that work in the arts that don't have this story of, whether they did it in private or hopped on a stage like you did, they were something. They were class president, they played sports, they did something that built that foundation for them that allowed them to just kind of jump out of, and the ones that didn't do that, they have to figure that out as an adult. And so for someone like you who filtered through you've been filtering through your ideas for a very long time and deciding which idea to move forward with. And I know that's foundational to your practice as a curator. But how do you know when an idea is worth building on? How do you know when an idea is worth building an exhibition around, or either even other avenues that you've built around?
That's a great question. So I pay very close attention to, I love this word, the zeitgeist, right? So like for me, um, seeing what's happening politically, and I don't just mean in this moment, but seeing what's happening politically, economically, culturally, inside and outside of the art world, watching a lot of films, listening to, maybe less so now, but listening to a lot of music, um, reading a lot of books, and recognizing that there's so many great concepts and ideas out there that could lend themselves to a project if you just look at it through a different lens,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to stay true to my own creativity at the same time. So not just like borrowing or stealing someone else's idea and trying to turn that into a show. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm saying that there are underlying things, there are currents that are flowing through different um, different things that could inspire an idea for an exhibition or a project. Or it might be a studio visit that I have with an artist, and it's a conversation during that visit that makes me realize that that artist is onto something, and that could be the seed of an exhibition with that artist that's perhaps a solo project or maybe it's a group show. I just remain open
Mm-hmm.
Um, I try to balance. It's just funny because people ask me like, "Oh, do you go to a lot of museums?" And I go, "Well, yes, but I also try to balance other experiences. I'm not trying to be a feedback loop for the art world to just
Mm-hmm.
simply, you know, make sure I go to all of the shows all of the time and then see how I can like do the same or better.
Right.
I'm trying to eat different kinds of foods, go to different kinds of countries,
Wow.
meet different kinds of people,
Mm-hmm.
have those experiences inform what I'm bringing into my curatorial work.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's much more refreshing and interesting. And how do I know an idea is good or not good? Often I don't. Uh, I just sometimes have to it, just go for it and hope that it resonates and that people get it. And sometimes in hindsight, I go, I would have done that differently if I, knew what I knew now or had more time or the budget was larger and all these kinds of things. But but one thing I know for sure, one thing I know absolutely for sure is that a lot of the great things that you've seen in the world done by great people, those people had no idea how it was going to be received. They had no idea that it would be successful. They hoped, they didn't know. And in hindsight, we can say all sorts of things, but when it's like really happening, no one really knows.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to tell you a little interesting thing that I always think about. There's so many layers to this conversation, and and in the absence of like an infinite amount of time,
Right. Right.
I'll try to zero in on a couple of things that I think are really important to point out. So around 1998 or 1999 or something like that, I used to go to Soho in Lower Manhattan a lot, and now the gallery scene in New York has kind of looped back around to Lower Manhattan. But just as like a little quick history lesson is that at one point, all of the important galleries in New York City, and before I was born, a long time ago, like we're talking about in the, I don't know, it must have been 50s, 60s, before I was born, a lot of the galleries were in Midtown. They were like, that's just where the gallery scene was. And then over time, the gallery scene kind of shifted down to Soho, more or less. And then it shifted back up to Chelsea, right? And so like a lot of people who are in their 20s now and 30s now, they've kind of only known the New York art scene and from the gallery standpoint of like being Chelsea, right?
Right.
But there were a lot of important galleries down in Soho. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was like even like Basquiat's dealer originally was down in Lower Manhattan as well. So anyway, there was a gallery there that I would just go into, and this is before I even was thinking about curating. And the gallery was owned by someone named Ivan Karp. And Ivan passed away, unfortunately, about 13, 14 years ago. But Ivan was the assistant to a very legendary art dealer named Leo Castelli.
Okay.
And Leo Castelli is, as far as like post-war New York art goes,
Mm-hmm.
legend. And so Ivan would tell these stories. And again, when Ivan died, he was like in his 80s. So if you go back, so Ivan's telling me stories of things that were happening in his life when he was like in his 30s, right? 30s,
Right.
40s, whatever. And artists would show up to Leo Castelli's gallery with portfolios or unannounced and uninvited
Mm-hmm.
with canvases to try to show him. And Ivan was kind of like the gatekeeper, like, whoa, 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 whoa. You can't just kind of show up like that.
Yeah.
But some of these artists were like Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol. And you're talking about people who we look at as these like pillars of, art success, whatever. They were just trying to figure it out.
Right.
They didn't know what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like, Artists, canvases rolled up under their arms. Hey, I want someone to look at my work, kind of thing. And you put that in a perspective, and it answers a lot of questions about certainty.
Hmm.
Like no one's certain.
Yeah. That's so true. I was just talking to an artist, and she was telling, I was Evita Tizano, I was telling you about, and she was telling me about how she would travel with another artist around the world in the van, and she had all of her art in the back of the trunk, and that's how they would go and show their work to folks because the internet wasn't here. And and artists are still doing that. I'm more than positive artists still show up with their portfolios to show their work, because so many artists just don't know how to approach galleries. They don't know when it's proper, and they're just shooting their shots. They don't know what else to do. And so with you, you've worked across these institutions. You've worked with galleries and institutions in different places and with these different cultural frameworks. I imagine that comes with learning how these systems work. And I don't want to jump so far into giving advice to or lending thoughts to artists, but because you have such a vast experience, how would you say, as an artist, as an emerging artist, to begin that approach?
Um, I think that any creative person has to be honest about a couple of things. And the ego can sometimes blind us to certain facts.
Mhm.
One of those facts is that you're not as important to other people as you think you are.
Mm,
Right?
mm,
In business. And this is a business, right?
mhm.
So when other people are waking up in the morning and thinking about what they want to get accomplished that day, you may factor into their plans, but really they're thinking about their goals. And so unless you are actually able to be instrumental in helping them achieve their goals in the way that they want to and need to, you're going to fall down on the priority list.
Mhm.
Right. And
Mhm.
so as an artist, what does this mean? If a gallery wants to work with you, then they see an opportunity to grow your career and to sell your work and make money. Let's just be real,
Yeah.
right? If they don't see a path to selling your work, and we're talking about commercial gallery here, they don't see a path to selling your work. They're they're not a nonprofit. They're not doing this to just be generous and kind. They're doing this to generate revenue.
Mhm.
And so you have to ask yourself, one, am I the kind of artist that can work in partnership in tandem with a gallery towards this sort of mutual goal? Because they're going to have some advice they want to give to me about what kind of work I should make. Maybe they're not in the studio telling you what colors to use, right? Which would be absurd.
Right.
I'm sure artists have heard more absurd things than that. But a relationship between an artist and the gallery should be, maybe it's not always, but in my view, should be a partnership,
Absolutely.
right? If it's not a partnership, it's a dictatorship.
Mhm.
And if it's a dictatorship, it's probably not going to last long. And a dictatorship can be either way. I mean,
Mhm.
with the
Mhm.
power dynamic, it's more likely that it would be the gallery dictating to the artist, of course. But not always so, because sometimes an artist will be very dictatorial about how they want to do things all the time. And the gallery is just like, it's not really working out. Last show didn't do too well. Maybe your canvases are too big, or maybe they were too small, or whatever the prescriptive thing the gallery wants to give. And if the artist is not receptive and open to this information and willing to kind of work collaboratively, then it's probably doomed to fail.
Yeah.
And so, for artists, I think that you have to think about which galleries are a good fit for you, because not every gallery is. That's a whole nother thing where I think there are a lot of artists, particularly inexperienced artists, whether they are younger or older is irrelevant. Experience just comes with action and time in doing something. It's not necessarily based on how old you are, right? There's a lot of 60-year-old artists who are really, really inexperienced,
Right.
right? In terms of working within the machinations of the art world. There, so anyway, recognize that you are the solution to someone else's problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a comfortable for everyone to think in those terms, but I do
Yeah.
believe those are pure terms. Once I started thinking about my curatorial work as solution work,
Hmm.
it changed everything.
Hmm.
Because as creative as I like to be with any project that I'm working on, I have to also be incredibly aware of the fact that any gallery or museum that is hiring me to do a show needs a solution to a problem. The problem is they have 3 months in their calendar that currently there is nothing. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
The solution is, what is the project going to be? And is it going to help them accomplish whatever their stated goals are? More attendance,
Right.
more community engagement,
Right.
more donor interaction, whatever it is, bringing new voices, whatever they're looking to do. I have to be aware that as a curator, one of my jobs is to solve those kinds of problems.
Hmm. That's such a great point. Um, and I just get so excited hearing you talk about this because I think the same exact way. And again, I really think that it's because of this background, your background in advertising and your background in marketing, that those are solution based fields, right? Like you insert yourself with marketing goals and you think about things from top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel and how are we going to get to this end goal, and you approach things with goals in mind. And I wonder, with you working with you having that approach and lending that to the arts, have you been met with any friction with being so goal oriented and being so um, thinking from the back to the forward instead of thinking from the beginning to the end? Have you run into any friction approaching things like that?
Yeah, I mean, because at the bottom of all of this, um, it's people, right? So when we talk about galleries, we talk about museums, art fairs, artists, we're talking about human beings. And they have all of the quirks and the issues that come with being human. And so sometimes people are not honest. Sometimes people are duplicitous. Sometimes people are slow. Sometimes people don't know what they're doing. Sometimes, there's all sorts of things. And I have to remember that. You email someone, you don't hear back. And these are like great lessons that I've learned over years. And I hope other people can kind of glean something from this. You know, Oftentimes when you don't hear back from people, it has nothing to do with you.
Hmm.
Oftentimes it's something they're dealing with. And you just have to remember that you can't take everything personal.
No.
Um, Sometimes you're working hard on a project with someone and they quit their job. They're no longer at the museum. And so your project is done. It's finished. It's not going to happen.
Wow.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Hmm.
Or sometimes they get fired. Same thing. Not going to happen. There's a lot of change and flux that happens in the art world that if you're not grounded enough to understand that you can't control everything, you could kind of lose your mind. I mean, I wouldn't really recommend my career path lightly to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I I never know. I never know what's going to happen. Like I never know what's going to happen. And as a result of that, there's a lot of adventure that comes with that, but there's also a lot of uncertainty about, and I don't just mean economically, like financially, right?
Yeah.
There's some like I was smart enough to approach this in a way where I was sort of undergirded with some stability, just because I recognized that even before I was married, even before I had younger children, because I have an older son who's actually graduated from college in 3 weeks from Howard University, which
Oh,
is
congratulations to him.
kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great.
Kind of crazy. But also three younger children who are, 8, 9, and 10, more or less,
Mhm.
so a whole nother journey ahead. But before I had the younger children and before I was married, I I recognized that I was going into a field that it was unclear how much money one could make
Hmm.
in the curate, just to be completely frank.
Hmm.
Um, and so I had to figure out at what pace I was going to work at in order to be able to make it work for me financially. And then early on in this journey, I was also willing to work at arts organizations and nonprofits as a way to learn more about the inner workings of the art world, but also to have some steady income as I was developing these other aspects of my career that were much more entrepreneurial, that were much more, risk taking, and I had to balance that out.
Hmm.
And also establishing ongoing relationships with organizations, for example, like the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, that I do lots of work with. A lot of respect for that organization. I've been working with them nonstop for the past 5 years. And even before that, had done some projects with them. And that work runs parallel with my other independent projects in different parts of the world. Um, and it's work that I'm able to do even though I live in Japan. And my work with New York Academy of Art has been going on for the past 5 or 6 years.
Hmm.
And that work I'm able to do even though I live in Japan. So, you have all these different layers of things that I'm doing professionally, and they all connect, but they're all necessary.
Hmm. Hmm. Why are they all necessary? And yeah, just plainly, why are they all necessary? And I ask that because you're independent. You're not necessarily working, you're not working at a museum, you're not working at an institution. You are independent and you insert yourself or you're inserted into these projects and into these institutions. So why do you think it has been necessary for you to be able to layer these different skill sets and then go into these places with these skill sets?
Well, I think that what I'm able to bring to any of these roles or any of these positions or projects is enhanced because of the other experiences that I have. So, for example, um, as an independent curator, I've been able to work with galleries in Germany and in England and Dubai, in Japan, and the United States, of course, and India. So like all of these like international projects, I can bring those experiences to bear when I'm having conversations with students at New York Academy of Art about the global art scene. I'm not just
Right.
talking in theory. I'm not just talking about the global art scene because I've read about the global art scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking from firsthand experience. With the Gantt Center being based in Japan and not based in the United States, even though the Gantt Center is focused on African American artists, Black artists, well, diasporic Black artists, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't have a bias to any particular region in the United States. I'm not there.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when I think about projects for the Gantt Center, I'm not just thinking about things that are arm's length,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
I can just easily collaborate with an artist in California or Texas as I can with an artist in Illinois or New York. Because for me, from a geographical standpoint, they're all far away. Like, it's not like it doesn't, I don't have a bias about that, right?
Right.
And then I also think that I'm able to look at things because of the distance, both physical distance and psychological distance. I'm able to look at things with a different kind of perspective, see the playing field a bit different than I would otherwise. Because one thing about being, like if I was in New York, for example, New York's got a lot of pros and cons. And I feel very, very qualified to be very critical of New York City because I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't need to hold my tongue about the downsides of New York because I've lived it for decades, 40 plus years in New York. I know what I'm talking about. Like, New York has a lot of opportunity, but it's also a place that is very inward looking in many ways. And you can get caught up into thinking that it is the whole world when it is not. And it's only after one is not there that you realize how it is a great place, but it's just another place.
Right.
Just another place. Like LA's a place, New York's a place, London's a place, Houston's a place, Tokyo's a place. They're just places, right?
Right.
But when you're in a place like New York and you're from there, you could very easily, and you could have a fulfilling career, like for sure. But you could very easily just stay in that bubble, for lack of a better term. And I wanted to get out of that.
That's so interesting because people want to get in that bubble.
Of course.
And yeah, it's a bubble that people want to get in, and you have this world perspective and this world view. And you mentioned the global ecosystem of the art world. Leaving New York and living in different places and experiencing different communities. First of all, how have you been able to go into these different places and gain trust for the work that you've done? And also, how has this global perspective most recently affected how you approach the art world, or how does that approach your thoughts towards the art world?
Well, in terms of like gaining trust, I recognize that you have to find people who are open-minded, because if they're not open-minded, then it's going to be hard to do anything with them to begin with. Your reputation matters because more than ever, I mean, not only does it seem like everyone knows each other in some way, I mean, just through degrees of separation, especially on social media, we can kind of like look at the matrix and see it, right? We can kind of see who we know in common, right? That kind of thing. And people can reach out to each other. You don't need anyone's email to contact them. You can pretty much contact anybody.
Anyone.
whether they respond or not is a whole nother question. But in terms of reaching out to people,
Yeah.
pretty much you can check anyone's credibility pretty easy, one or two ways. So knowing that, it was important for me as I was building my, reputation and experiences in the art world to just, treat everyone as good as possible, as well as possible. I mean, not everyone's going to reciprocate that. That's fine. But also recognizing that if you got to learn how to talk to people, how to get them enthusiastic about your ideas, which is a skill, not one that's easy to teach, but it's an important thing to be able to talk. How do you talk to a stranger and have them leave the conversation wanting to have another conversation with you? That's really, not easy. No. How do you present your accomplishments, for lack of a better word, in a way that is exciting, but not bragging? These are balancing acts, and being able to do that is something that I think I carried over from my advertising and marketing life. But I'm constantly pitching ideas to institutions and to galleries and to artists. And so you hone those skills over time. I mean, you also recognize that you have to be good to people. Doesn't mean you have to be so self-sacrificing that you get taken advantage of, or that you don't prioritize yourself health-wise, economically, etc. But you have to be good to people. You have to be, in my opinion, you have to be the kind of person that people feel like they can rely on. Take the small project, prove yourself, then do the big project. That's important.
How do you balance that in the art world? And I know a lot of people have this question, because I have this conversation often. How do you balance that, not getting taken advantage of, or lending yourself to a project and now you've done 20 projects for free, and everyone recognizes, this person as someone who adds value, but they always ask for their value for nothing. I see that happen a lot in the art world. How do you balance maintaining your livelihood and being this person that constantly lends yourself to projects?
Well, I don't work for free, but I am willing to do things that I believe in for free. So very different things. So I don't think that it's reasonable to ask, anyone to do a project that generates money without compensating them. I think that's generally unreasonable in my view. So I think it's important for individuals, whether they are artists or curators or advisors or whatever role they have in the art world, to draw a line in the sand and say, there's some things that I'm just not going to do for free. Just hard stop, non-negotiable, hard stop. And you have to define that for yourself, but you also kind of like have to know what your financial needs are. Like, how much money do you actually need to generate every month, every quarter, every year to grow towards something, not just to stay above water, but to like grow towards something, and then do the things that are necessary to get to that point where you are making that money. Tell people no. Practice saying no. Even if you got to start off telling yourself no in the mirror, practice saying no. I started saying no to things pretty early in this journey, because I realized that, and I didn't coin this, but saying yes to something is kind of like saying no to something else.
Right.
And there have been projects I'd worked on early on where I felt like I put way too much time and energy for the financial reward of it, like way too much. And if it was something that was going to build my credibility, then sure, maybe it's worth it. But there's a balancing act there. Like, for example, I'll give you it's a random example. One could argue that, curating a major biennial that would put you on a world stage, maybe that would be worth doing for little to no money because of all of the visibility, or quote the dirty word, exposure that it will give.
The dirty word.
But I would argue that maybe not. Maybe not, because I think that lending your labor and your intellectual energy to something that generates potentially millions of dollars and not seeing any of that money is more damaging to you than the exposure would be beneficial to you. Because it damages your sense of your value and yourself and your worth. Not your, I was going to say self-worth. I don't really mean that. I mean, we can have self-worth that's untethered to money. That's for sure.
Right.
But in terms of being taken advantage of. Imagine that. You've curated this major art event. You've made very little to no money doing it. Yet everyone else involved are the millionaires flying in and sipping the champagne and, you know, buying and selling art. And you're responsible for the creative vision of the thing.
Hmm.
And you still don't know if your rent's taken care of.
Hmm.
I think that's far more damaging to you than anything.
Yeah, I could agree. I mean, I do agree. I do agree, 100%. I want to kind of switch over to understanding and talking a little bit more about what your curatorial vision is, or what your mission is in curating.
It's changed over the years.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was about helping artists that I knew personally get opportunities to have their work seen.
Uh-huh.
And then it grew beyond that to how can I create transformative experiences
Uh-huh.
for audiences who want to come and see art, for institutions that maybe they're stuck and they're trying to figure out exciting new ideas.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, I think more than anything, I'm interested in connecting the dots internationally, like figuring out how I can be a catalyst to an artist, perhaps having their first exhibition in India, or their first exhibition in Abu Dhabi, or their first exhibition in, South Africa or something like that. And being in the middle of those situations has really become something that's really exciting to me.
Yeah.
Um, being the curator to organize an artist's first museum exhibition in Canada, in the United States, in Mexico, like those kinds of things are really exciting to me because I think we're at a time now where it's very easy to get caught up in the political moment and to get depressed and angry and like disenchanted, and also to look at the art world as being like compared to other things unimportant, right? Because I'm sure like people have those conversations like, how important is the Venice Biennale in the face of mass deportation,
You're right.
right? Well, it doesn't lose its importance in the face of mass deportation,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't. And what we need to, and it's like, who am I to tell people what they need to do? I'm telling you what I do.
Right.
I had to understand that the world existed before me, the
Hmm.
world was after me.
Hmm.
Fact.
Yeah.
So here I am in the time that I have in the world. What am I going to do?
Hmm.
What good things am I going to bring to the world?
Hmm.
Because if I bring good things to the world, then it improves people's lives, even if it's down to the individual artist or gallery owner or museum employee or any individual whose life is made incrementally better because of something that I'm doing, then that is good work.
Hmm. Yeah. You sound like you really care about development, and the more I listen to you, the more I would approach you being an ecosystem builder. And, being in these places and wanting to literally build or help build the ecosystem. Or like you say, making sure that an artist that lives in the US has their first show in Japan or has their first show in India. That's expanding their ecosystem. Would you explain yourself in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some truth to that. 5 years ago, I started an artist residency in Japan called the Hayama Artist Residency, and it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and it was a way for me to think about how I could bring artists to a new country. Perhaps it might be their first time visiting, so they can have different kinds of experiences, expand their horizons. Yes, be part of a different kind of ecosystem. So I think that's very very true. And I'm still working through that. Like, how can I expand that and build upon that in a bigger way? I feel as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I feel incredibly fortunate, like incredibly fortunate because I am in a place where, when I say place, I don't mean physically, I mean psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a place where I can literally look at a globe and think about where I want to do work.
Hmm.
I never thought that I would be in that position,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That I could look at countries I've never visited and say, hmm, I'm going to do a project in the Philippines, just random, I'm going to do a project in, you fill in the blank country,
Mm-hmm.
and know that because of the relationships I've built up over the past 15 plus years,
Mm-hmm.
there's only two or three steps to at least getting the ball rolling, right?
Right.
Like this, who's to say if the project will actually happen? That requires a lot of people saying yes.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of having an idea and a vision and being able to get it going, I feel very, very fortunate and uniquely positioned to be able to do that. And that's just not to my benefit. There's nothing I can do as a curator, and this is one of the reasons I enjoy this role. There's nothing I can do as a curator on my own.
Hmm.
Nothing. Everything is collaborative. Everything has to be a collaboration because I'm not an artist, right? So I'm not making work. So even at the most basic level, it's me and an artist collaborating,
Right. Right.
right? So
Right.
everything is a collaboration.
How do you approach that creatively? If you're gonna go into a different country, say you go into the Philippines and you're doing a show there, how do you approach what you're gonna do there? How do you approach that creatively?
Um, I try to learn as much as possible about new places that I'm working in. Not to the extent that I'm ever going to be an overnight expert on another culture or country. It's not really possible. But to acknowledge my blind spots and not come in as if I am teaching people something they don't know. And when I say that, I don't just mean from the standpoint of like, the American coming in with ideas to, some other culture. I mean, even going in the other direction, like, being a black person, for example, trying to educate people on, the things they don't know about black culture. That's like it's not my job, right? And also working in other cultures, trying to teach them something about their own culture. I certainly am not going to do that. That's not
Right.
my job. People
Right.
ask me about like, what's it like living in Japan and what are the challenges? And I go, well, number one is I'm not trying to change Japan.
Hmm.
So I don't really have that. So like as far as challenges, I I'm playing by their rules. I'm in their country,
Hmm.
right? Like it's like if there's something I don't like about the structure of Japanese society that has been going on for decades, if not hundreds of years, that's my problem, not
Yeah.
their problem.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not trying to do that. I can't. I moved to Japan out of a desire to do that.
Mhm.
So there's a long journey of learning, not just, picking up language and learning customs, but also recognizing within the art world in Japan, it doesn't function like the art world in the US, like apples to apples. The differences. Collectors don't operate the same way. They're much more, you know, and it's a generalization, but it's been my experience. Like collectors here are generally much more private,
Hmm.
right? It's not about the let me get the feature in XYZ publications so you can see the inside of my home. That's not really the vibe.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
And so you recognize that you have to realize that when you're having a conversation with people about things, there's some things they're willing to talk about very freely. Other things they need a lot more time to get to know you before they really start talking about those things. Which has been for me, because so much of the work I do is outside of Japan, it means that I don't have to have all that pressure of of like making a living off of the Japanese art world ecosystem.
Right.
I have the good fortune of being able to take my time because I make a living, so to speak, or generate income primarily outside of Japan.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of, collectors, you've curated a lot of shows that engage collectors at every level, from that institutional, from, institutional patrons to those private collectors. Um, how do you think about building a collector base around an exhibition, especially if it's for a commercial gallery?
Yeah, well, um, I realized that I can't do everything.
Mhm.
And I generally focus my attention on the curatorial aspect. I try to stay out of for commercial projects in particular. I try to stay out of the sales aspect of it,
Yeah.
primarily because not because I don't have interest and not because I don't have ability, but I recognize that curating a show is enough work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's enough work.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have to also get involved in sales,
Mm-hmm.
then it's almost too much.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost too much because then, not to be flippant, but if I'm curating the show and I'm involved in sales, then what's everybody else doing?
Yeah. I get that. Trust me. So, what role do you think curators play in shaping? Because even though you're, as a curator, you're not involved in sales, you might not want to. I know for a fact that happens, but you might not want to touch that. You still play a role in sales because you play a role in education. So, how do you approach that education realm of your curatorial practice when you're curating a show?
When you say education, do you mean educating collectors?
I mean, educating viewers.
Oh, right. Well, I think that working with artists that having had a lot of opportunities is really important because you're bringing new voices into the conversation, which I think for me is really exciting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that new audiences or audiences that are going to see shows and they have questions about artists, I'm more than happy to engage in that way, create programming, give curator talks, gallery tours, things of that nature. Everything is kind of case by case specific in many ways, but I'm all for it. I think that being able to share the background of an artist's life and history and talk about that, I think is really important and great. And so um, I'll sometimes be asked to attend gatherings of collectors from time to time to talk about art and artists, but I'm also quite careful. Back to what we're saying about like knowing where to draw the line in the sand. Like, look, we can be candid here. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think there are a lot of people who don't recognize the difference between what is and isn't work.
Hmm. Hmm. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Like someone might ask you, they might say, "Hey, who, what artist should I be looking at right now?"
Mm.
Now, that sounds like an innocuous question, right?
Right.
Because, it's a cocktail question, right? You have a drink, they have a drink. Hey, who should I be looking at right now? Well, if they're asking you that question because they're actually building a collection
Mm.
and they're spending money on art and they're serious about it and they know that you are serious about art advising and serious about educating yourself on the art world, they're actually asking you for information that you've spent time and energy to educate yourself to have an opinion that matters.
Right. Right.
and they're asking you that information for free.
Right.
And while it doesn't take much for you to rattle off a few names, we can all do that.
Mm-hmm.
When they really want to kind of then ask, like, well, why? And do you know them? And how? And can they get studio visits? Then they start moving into the realm of asking you to work for free.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to be able to set boundaries to say, hey, of course, here's an artist I'm interested in, and here's another artist. But if you want to really kind of get into it, why don't we just, have a meeting and I'll give you 2 hours of my time for X amount of dollars, and I'll just, tell you, answer any question you have.
Yeah.
That at least creates a sense of seriousness.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they might say, oh, it's just question, just want to know, like banter back and forth. And I go, it's fine, kind of like want to know. But imagine a gallery emailing me, and this hasn't happened, but it's kind of a similar thing. It's like, imagine a gallery emailing me and saying, hey, Dexter, hope you're doing well. We're looking to do a show in a couple of months, but we'd love to know, like, are there one or two artists you think we should reach out to put in the show? But that's like the extent of what they're asking me. It's like, why on earth would I do that? It's like,
right.
It's like,
no, this happens all the time though. It does. I've talked to a few folks about what you're mentioning because everything's so cavalier, everything's so DM, and everyone just DMs people like it's nothing and ask questions, and I find it okay most times, giving recommendations and et cetera, but it can go too far, and people can get to the point to where it's like they're always asking you, et cetera, et cetera. And if you didn't, what I've learned is if you don't set the boundary at the beginning of the conversation, then the boundary's like never set. And since I've said these things online, because I'm having conversations with people, since I've said these things out loud, I've noticed some folks kind of pull back on asking me questions, and it's kind of bittersweet in a way because I was in a way enjoying answering them because I enjoyed talking about the art world and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some benefit to sharing one's knowledge in a social way if you feel like the person that you're talking with is someone who you care about. And when I say care about, I don't mean it from the standpoint of you having like a friendship with them that's deep or an intimate relationship. I just mean care about their outcome, care about them having good outcomes. And that can just happen because you admire someone, right?
Right.
But I also think that it's important for people to recognize that someone who has spent years learning about how the art world functions and the inner workings of it all deserves to be compensated for their knowledge if you're asking them for information. And and I just feel strongly about that.
Yeah, I do too. I'm glad we shared that sentiment. And you've worked also in a lot of artist development, and remind me of the name of creative study and it's creative study and art world conference. Are those two totally separate things?
Funny you should ask. So they are two separate things, but let me try to share something with you that you might find interesting.
Okay.
So I created Art World Conference back in 2017, 18 as a way to scale up this idea of professional development for artists. Because I was doing a lot of one-on-one conversations, as I mentioned earlier, right? Helping artists with things like marketing and invoicing and figuring out how to like run their studio more like a business. But I realized that I couldn't do that for hundreds of artists. I mean, just not enough time. I'm one person. And so I decided to create a conference, a business conference for artists called Art World Conference. And so, along with a business partner named Heather Bendari, who had written a book called Artwork, which was very inspirational to me, we became partners in 2018, 2017, 18, and we launched the first Art World Conference in New York in April 2019. So, roughly 6 years ago to the day.
Man.
Art World Conference was meant to travel to different cities around the US, and we did the second one in Los Angeles in February 2020. Then the pandemic started, and we decided that you can't do a big in-person conference with hundreds of people over 3 days during a pandemic. Who knew how long the pandemic would last? So we decided to take Art World Conference and turn it into an online conference. And we did that in 2020 and 2021. We eventually changed the name of Art World Conference to Art World Learning, and then the name Art World Learning was eventually changed to Creative Study. So that's like the, right. But Creative Study was always meant to be a place that artists and other creatives could turn to as a resource for information about things like taxes and managing debt and credit and writing business plans and all the things that you didn't necessarily learn if you went to a traditional art school. And so colleges and universities also subscribe to Creative Study to give their students access to the content, the video, and sort of course content that we had developed. So that was a business that I was running for years in the background over the past few years, while I'm also curating shows and working with New York Academy of Art and running an artist residency and working with the Gantt Center. So, right?
Yeah.
Recent development is that we've actually donated our company, Creative Study, to a Minnesota-based nonprofit called Springboard for the Arts. We donated the entire company, all of my shares in Creative Study. I donated all of them to Springboard for the Arts about a month ago. Like, this is a very recent development, which means I am no longer a shareholder or owner of Creative Study completely. And it was a full 100% donation. So now Creative Study lives on under the umbrella of Springboard for the Arts, with, you know, a long-standing, well-respected arts nonprofit, so that they can build upon what Heather and I have built over the past few years.
That's amazing. It's so many things that I could ask you. And I realize even in this conversation, we haven't even gone into specific projects that you've worked on and what these projects mean to you, how you brought them together. And you've done so much. And, you know, and within this ecosystem, what has been the most important part for you?
Showing by example that one can have a fulfilling life in the art world as a parent, you know, father of four. I've been married for, you know, it'll be, wow, time flies, 13 years soon. And being in a space that I found was not necessarily a space that sort of nurtured the idea of someone sort of not just being this like individual, like who's just like, you know, going to all the parties and the events and sort of like Forever 21 kind of thing, right? It's like this constant sort of feeling that if you wanted to have a well-rounded life, then you couldn't take a sort of entrepreneurial path in the art world because it's like too unpredictable and too unstable. And so it's been really important and rewarding for me to show that that is possible, you know, not without its, you know, obstacles, of course, but to be able to do this kind of work and also, you know, put a kid through college.
Yeah.
And I'll be transparent, right? Not that anyone asks, but put a kid through college without student loans.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So like that key important piece of the puzzle
Yeah, for sure.
um is so important to me.
Yeah. I respect that very deeply, especially now in my role as I've just become a mom. My baby's 5 months old, and it's been something that's been, that we've been navigating. My
Yeah.
husband and I work primarily in marketing, and I'm deciding to go full fledged within the arts, without that support of working in marketing projects and working for a company. And that what you've done, what you've been able to do throughout your career is extremely, extremely inspiring for me, and I'm sure for anyone that's listening, that's going to be listening to this conversation. It means a lot. And one of the things I always harp on is you have to keep momentum because momentum creates momentum. And another thing that I harp on is other people's momentum creates your momentum. And so I want to thank you for the momentum that you've constantly created in your life because it gives me momentum. Even this conversation gives me momentum. So I'm really, really thankful for it. And yeah, hopefully my husband listens to this conversation. He like sees someone that's done it successfully because he's a finance guy. He cares about finance and he cares about the bottom line and making the money, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is, the work that he does goes from I could do this to make this, dealing with the stock market. And the work that we do is very much so relational and
Mhm.
it takes so much time. But anyway, we're gonna have to have another conversation because we didn't even get into your curatorial work for real. We talked about so much that I think is really important, but I think that's an entirely different layer to the conversation that we can get into.
Yeah.
So I want to do something called the Glory Hour, and it's a segment where I ask folks that I'm in conversation with, not just about like what they've done, but what it all has meant to them. So, what does glory mean to you right now? And we call this the Glory Hour because I believe glory isn't just about the spotlight. It's about alignment and purpose and the legacy that you choose to leave behind. And yeah, so what does glory mean to you in this season of your life?
I think that I'm grateful, and I know that glory and gratefulness aren't necessarily the same thing, but it makes me think of how grateful I am.
Yeah.
Um, People have believed in me. Like they've believed in me. Maybe I don't know why. And maybe that's not even important for me to know.
Mm.
But the faith that people have had in me has opened up every door, every opportunity that I've had. It's been someone saying, I believe in you. I believe that you are going to do what you say, and I believe that I want to take a chance on you.
Yeah. That's really important. And I think it goes back to the fact that you said as a curator in your role, you can't do anything without anyone else. So you need people to believe in you and you need to believe in other people in order for everything to work. So thank you for sharing that. So right now, that was our glory hour. Now we're gonna go into some quick fire rapid questions. So you can't think about it.
Sure.
You have to just answer. Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
An artist you've never worked with, but you would say yes to working with in a heartbeat.
Frank Bowling.
A book that changed the way you think about art or power.
I have a book here called Collecting Contemporary. This is one of the first books that I read early in my journey.
Hmm.
A bit dated now, but it had a huge impact on how I thought about curating and collecting.
Hmm. A place that made you fall back in love with art.
New York.
Hmm. You can't fight it, huh?
Yeah.
One thing curators need to continue doing.
building relationships with each other.
One thing curators need to stop doing.
Caring what other people think.
One thing artists need to protect at all costs.
Their integrity.
What's bringing you joy right now outside of work?
The freedom that I have every day.
If you weren't curating, what would you be doing?
Probably focused on like real estate. Not for the sake of making money, but just bringing new projects to life.
So the same thing, just with real estate. Well, that's all I have. I want to thank you for all of this, for the way that you think, the way that you move, the way that you've made space for artists and for people like me. And thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed this. I know you're all the way in Japan, but the next time, when are you coming to Texas?
Great question. Probably within the next few months. I didn't go to the Dallas Art Fair. I was there last year, but the next time I go to either Houston or Dallas, I will do both cities because I feel like that's like really just necessary. So probably within the next 10 months.
Okay, well maybe for Untitled Houston's coming here.
Maybe.
Okay. Well, we'll talk more about that off camera. And thanks to everyone. First of all, Dexter, do you have anything else that you want to that's on your heart that you want to mention that you think people need to hear?
Sure. A lot, but I would just say that in the past few months, I've had to consciously change the kind of media and information that I'm exposing myself to on a daily basis, because I think that what's happening politically, not just in America, because obviously what happens in America can affect the entire globe. I think what's happening, it is an assault to decent people in the way that they think. And I've had to kind of keep good things in front of me as opposed to getting so deeply caught up in all of the terrible things that are happening. It means, to acknowledge them, to try to contribute where I can, share what I can, but to not let the world just bring you down.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a lot. That's an earful for a lot of people right now. It's we're in a very sensitive political state, and it has become a part of my daily conversation, just like it did when he was in office a few years ago. And I live in Texas.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and I think that's all I need to say. I live in Texas, so it's been difficult. These conversations have been difficult, and maybe that's another conversation we can have, and how that's affecting the art world, and how politics and these economic downturns and upturns and political downturns and upturns really do affect the art world, and how they even just affect us in general. There are a lot of different conversations that we can have that stem from this. So I really do hope that this isn't the last one we have in front of folks. I'm sure we'll have more, but I hope this isn't the last one that we have in front of people.
Yeah, I would love to talk again, and there's so many layers. As you mentioned, the curatorial work is something that has there's such a wealth of things to explore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these conversations, they just seem to just go on and on and on and on, and it could last 3 hours. I look down, we're already at about an hour 40 minutes. So I have to stop the conversation, and I don't want to. I really don't want to. So for those of you guys watching, if this conversation gave you anything, I would love for you to stay connected. You can subscribe to this channel, of course. You can also subscribe to my newsletter at the link in the description. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, then you can check out the Patreon. It's all in the link in the description, and we unpack a little bit more than we do on this channel in the Patreon. And Dexter, where can people follow your journey or get in touch with you?
I've kept it really simple. All of my social media and website and everything is just my full name, Dexter Wimberly. So it's as easy as that.
Well, we'll have all of Dexter's links in the description. So make sure to stay connected with the work that Dexter's doing. And again, guys, y'all know what I always say. It doesn't matter if you're an artist, a collector, or someone just here for the love of art. I really pray and I really hope that Dear Glory has been a safe space for you and your home. And y'all stay rooted, stay safe in these streets. These streets get a little crazy. Anyway, I'm Mariah Elise.
I'm Dexter Wimberly.
And thank you guys for being here. Peace. Dexter, thank you so much for your clarity, your generosity, and for the way that you've built a career that's not just successful, but really intentional. This conversation reminded me why I do this work. And I know it gave so many others watching a new way to think about what's possible in this space. I know it allows you to open your mind and how you approach being in the art world. And honestly, I feel like we only scratched the surface. So I'm officially saying it on camera. We have to do this again. There's so much more to unpack. There's so much more to build on. And I'm sure you have a lot more experience and stories to tell. Now, if this conversation sparks something for you, don't let it stop here. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, sign up for my newsletter, and check out my Patreon. The link's in the description. And if you want to go even deeper, join our Patreon. That's where we continue these kinds of conversations, share the behind-the-scenes insights, and build together. And please stay connected to Dexter's work. You can follow him at dexterwimberly.com, and on social, all his links are in the description. Support what he's building. Support what he's built. Follow his journey because his work is really inspiring. Thank you for watching. Stay rooted, stay intentional, and I'll see you in the next one.